How many of you have had issues with metabolism as you've aged? You've noticed that, the fat creeps on. Many of you have told me, you're like, if I haven't look at food, Regan, I gain 10 pounds, I swear. Metabolic burnout is where you've got fatigue, low energy, and inability to lose fat, even in spite of all your best efforts. And it's a condition that can hit you literally any age. When you consume foods, then this hormone sends signal to the brain that indicates satiety. And so this leptin resistance, it arises when receptors in the hypothalamic gland, when it loses sensitivity to leptin. And then you're always hungry, and it's a frustrating place to be. I want to look my best and feel my best, even at my 100th birthday party. All right, welcome everybody. It's Regan here, and this is your Weekly Health Accelerator community, and also known as the Hack. And not to, the hack is a term it's an acronym, but we got it off the word biohacking, but I don't necessarily love that phrase, because nothing that we want to do to your health would ever be, I wouldn't want to consider it a hack. But what we're doing is sharing with you some of the fastest ways you can achieve unreasonable health in the shortest period of time. So really good to be back. I just got off a flight. I was in New Jersey for the last 7 days. And for those of you who attended our event there, so good seeing you. And then, it's so nice to have the New Jersey space where, we can go with my friend Sunny, hang out there, but met a lot of very, very amazing people. The best thing that happened in New Jersey, we went to New York, spent the weekend there, and we had a party at the World Trade Center for Sunny's 50th birthday. And if anyone's ever partied with Indians, the Punjabi Indians, holy cow, they do know how to throw a feast and host an event. It was at the top floor of the World Trade Center, and now it's called Freedom Tower or One World Trade Center. Oh, it was gorgeous. The views were epic. People were amazing. You got there, we took pictures. There was dancing. The food, it was all Indian food. And the funny thing about it is the party starts and you eat, and there's smaller plates, and there's a little dessert too. So I just assumed that was dinner. And then they had the whole presentation celebrating Sunny's life and talking about his entrepreneurial journey. And Sunny is a human who he came to the United States as a 17-year-old with 20 bucks in his pocket, and he had some family here, and he ended up pumping gas and got a job. And then about a year later, he got certified to drive a taxi cab. So he was driving yellow cabs around Manhattan for about a decade while he put himself through school. He studied computer engineering. But one of the things that he shared with me is a lot of times at the end of the night, he would pick up certain characters. And the thing that was really hard for him is they would just leave the cab. They'd jump out. They wouldn't pay because it was all cash back then. And then when Mayor Giuliani got put in, they put some protection there. But about once a month, he would get basically robbed. They would say, give me all your cash. And either it'd be a gun to the head or a knife or some weapon. And then he would have to work the next day. So the way that it works is he paid the yellow cab was $100 to rent the taxi, and then about $20 in gas, and he would make about $220. And so when he got robbed, it was that days of work that he just did. All the money went to the creep who robbed him, and then he would have to basically work for free the next day. So he'd pay the $200 back to the cab and then pay for his gas. But he's the sweetest guy. He's not jaded. I think it would be hard not to get a little jaded if you had people treating you that way. But, celebrating his life, he just, published his next book called Borderless Life. He's now got a business. He's got, somewhere in the range of about 1,100 employees in India, another 700 in the Philippines, and so cool spending some time with him. So, I don't know about you, but my ageless future, it has really cool relationships like my relationship with Sunny. And now I know how to celebrate my 50th birthday coming up in a couple of years here, which is let's rent the top of the World Trade Center. And you guys are all invited. It was really cool. Lots of dancing. So here's what happened with dinner. So we had the celebration, and then Sunny's wife, Cam, she said, by the way, if you don't dance, you don't get to eat dinner. And she had already had a conversation like, bring all your friends up, make sure the dance floor is filled up. And then when she said that, I said, well, I already ate dinner. I think most people did. But then the real dinner came out and I was like full. So we didn't eat any of it because I was like, I don't want my number one, the greatest sin, as my teacher says, is overeating. So I was like, I think I'm good, but it was, the best food. And then I asked Sonny the next couple mornings later, we're on a run. And I was like, what is it with the food? And he said in their culture, they want to make sure that nobody goes hungry. And that, in India, a lot of people were starving. A lot of people went hungry. And so he's part of the Sikh religion. And that's like the main emphasis is serving others and making sure that nobody goes hungry. So I thought it was really beautiful. So when they host parties, they put a lot of intentionality around the food and making sure everyone has a good time. They celebrate life like I've never seen. There's this very specific dance. So for those of you who have ever done the Indian dance, it's like one foot up and one arm up, and then you go the other, and it's a really fun way to celebrate. So with that, how does your ageless future? Are you guys building some cool relationships and cool experiences? Coming back here to Utah after being in Manhattan and Jersey City for the last week, I'm like, I really love the mountains. They're so amazing. And I love the city. I love the vibrancy to it, but it's always nice to be home. I missed my wife, but I had my son with me the whole time. So it was really cool. After working with me for a few days, I'm like, well, what do you think? What have you learned? And he's like, it's actually really hard work. I'm like, yeah, we go long days and we try to add as much value as we can to the humans that we meet. So really grateful that I got to meet many of you who are joining us. And so let's talk about today's subject, which is how you keep your energy up and, you avoid this thing called hormonal resistance. So, all right. So how many of you have continued to share? Okay. How many of you have had issues with metabolism as you've aged? You've noticed that, the fat creeps on. Many of you have told me, you're like, if I haven't looked at food, Regan, I gained 10 pounds, I swear. And there's a reason, and we're going to talk about that because it becomes really frustrating when you can't get the body composition where you want it. I mean, Charles Euster, when he took up bodybuilding, what he learned is he said, look, I really want to be fit because he was in his late 80s and he said, there's some good looking 70-year-olds and I'm trying to turn their eye. And so, wanting to look good doesn't go away. I remember one of my dear patients wrote we were working on, she'd lost 40 pounds and she wanted to keep going and she was 93. And I remember, going to her house before she passed away, I was able to say goodbye to her. And she was just the most beautiful woman. But, it's something that we're always working on. And one of the tricks the universe plays on us as we age is it's easier to accumulate fat. And so one of my obsessions is to be of value as best as I can to you and understand what your health goals are. And one of the health goals that I have not, shied away from is helping you look your best. So feel your best, look your best, perform your best. And when you have metabolic burnout and hormonal resistance, that seems to be the thing that gets in the way. And actually, it can come at any stage of life. And a lot of times it's misdiagnosed. Your labs will say everything looks normal, but you have this metabolic burnout. So let's define this. So metabolic burnout is where you've got fatigue, low energy, and inability to lose fat, even in spite of all your best efforts. And it's a condition that can hit you literally any age. And there's a reason for this, which we'll dive into. Hormonal resistance comes from the thyroid. It also comes from insulin resistance, which you can see in the graph here for those of you who are watching this. And then it also happens when the leptin pathways are malfunctioning. So I don't have a prop, but I was going to show you if you think of fat, what fat does is it's like its own organ system in your body. And so it wants to recruit other fat cells. It's kind of like, people you hang out with over time, you start developing, kind of the same thinking patterns, and you start taking on some of their energy. It's just human nature is we feed off of each other, and these pathways start to get blocked. And so just like fat's trying to recruit things and we want to recruit really amazing people into our lives, this is where we're going to shift it so that you recruit the right things as you age and not the wrong things. So leptin, how many of you have ever wondered why you're so hungry all the time? Has anyone ever, am I the only one that's experienced that? Okay, looks like some of you have. So, raise your hand if that's you. But this is often a sign of leptin resistance. So there's this hormone called ghrelin. So there's leptin and there's ghrelin. And ghrelin is the hormone that makes you hungry. And leptin is one of the hormones that turns off that hunger signal. And then when leptin is nice and balanced, then you have this beautiful expression of glucagon-like peptide, or the GLP-1. And many of us know about GLP-1 agonists. So when you take an agonist or a peptide that agonizes, agonizes is just it's a word for expresses. So you express more of this GLP-1, you can do it through a peptide, because a lot of us, that gets broken because we have leptin resistance. And when we run your labs, you'll notice that we run these massive thyroid panels. And one of the thyroid panels that we look at is your free T3, your free T4, and then we also may look at your reverse T3. And we'll look at your total thyroxine levels, and these are indicators of leptin resistance. And so these symptoms, like insulin resistance, if you don't know what it is, just do yourself a favor and watch a Snickers commercial where they talk about hunger. And so if you're somebody who gets shaky between meals, or you get grumpy if you don't eat, that's some hanger. And on the team, we have Tristan, and then we have my boys who are 19, and they get hungry, and you can tell that they're hungry, even though they don't necessarily have insulin resistance. But when they're in this metabolic growth pattern, the body needs energy. So the body is like warning you, and it's doing that through ghrelin. But as we age, it's like, I've already eaten enough. Like when I was at the Indian party, I was like, I don't need to eat another dinner. I wanted to, my eyeballs wanted to, but when I sensed my body, I'm like, no, I'm not going to sleep well tonight, and I'm going to have another chance to eat this amazing food. Because, Sonny, he brings his caterers with him, and we've been at other parties and had that amazing food. And so I realized, like, okay, I need to step away. But when insulin resistance is there, you can feel really tired and hungry. And then you eat and you feel this sense of euphoria. And then your pancreas starts making insulin. And if that insulin can't get the sugar into the cell, because the cells are resistant, that's where it's called insulin resistance. The cells block the ability for glucose to get taken into the cell. And glucose is a major form of metabolic energy. So where does the glucose go? And the glucose typically will get stored in your fat cell as an energy reserve for later on. And so if you have a little extra padding on your body, don't worry, that's just energy that you're saving for later. And then that sugar, as it gets stored, once again, that fat, suddenly you become more insulin resistant, because the more fat cells you have, the harder it is to have metabolic health. So insulin resistance is kind of interesting, because there's a Dr. Gerald Schulman, and many of you may have heard of this accumulation that he discovered, these pathways in the liver, and it's called DAG, or dicycloglycerol. And the liver and muscle, what happens is when your muscles are really healthy, and this is one reason why that ageless axis is, make sure you have a healthy brain, healthy muscle, and healthy blood, or healthy vessels or heart. And because when you have really healthy muscles, then your muscles will take in the glucose and store it as glycogen storage, and it gets stored in your liver as well. So the next morning when you go exercise, you can do it in a fasted state. You feel great. You don't get that tiredness. You don't have to eat before you work out. But if you're hungry when you wake up, that's not a problem. Eat a little bit before you go work out. Ideally, you ladies, if you get about 15 to 20 grams of protein, within that first 30 minutes to an hour of waking, put like a little collagen in your coffee, or, just do something light. That is really good for insulin sensitivity. I know a lot of you women, you fast, and men, we can fast a little bit longer, just the way that our metabolic system works, than women. So dudes, if you eat a little bit, that's great. Try to have a little protein in the morning before your workout, but save your big meal for a couple hours after waking, maybe 3 hours. But what happens is, when you have this silencing of the insulin signaling and via this PKC pathways, then what you'll notice is you're not going to get the sugar into the cell when insulin is silent, that signaling, because now you're insulin resistance. And then what happens is you have this decrease of mitochondrial function, so you lose energy. And then when you're losing mitochondrial function, that's when inflammation goes up. That's when you have this what's called lipogenesis, and it's called an increase of de novo lipogenesis. And your skeletal muscles don't have the energy reserves. This morning, we went on another run. My son Dominic and I, we ran a 5K around Governor Island, and it was so cool to be out there because you see the Statue of Liberty. You've got this great view of Manhattan. It was hard not to get distracted on that racetrack, but I was really grateful for the work that I've done on my skeletal muscle because I had, energy the whole way through. When I got to the end, I was like, man, my heart rate average was 136. It didn't spike more than like 143. And I was running 8-minute miles. But, my son, I was like, you go, the goal was for him to beat 20 minutes. And I think he got like 21. He did great. He got third in his division. But I realized, okay, I could have ran faster, but I had really good energy. And I saw a lot of people, they started fast and then they just did not have the glycogen storage in their body. And so they kind of petered out. And so what you'll see is the result of this insulin resistance and this DAG-PKC mechanism is you're going to see this fasting glucose rise, this dysfunctional metabolism, and that can be present even if you have perfect hemoglobin A1C, which is one reason when we run your labs, we're not just looking at hemoglobin A1C. What we'll be looking at is your insulin fasting. We want to look at how healthy your what's called C-peptide is, and then we'll look at LDH. But don't be fooled that you don't have insulin resistance because your hemoglobin A1C is normal. There's other pathways you want to look at. So I'm standing up here, folks. Okay, so let's talk about the leptin and thyroid resistant pattern, because this is interesting. When you consume foods, then this hormone sends signal to the brain that indicates satiety. And so this leptin resistance, it arises when receptors in the hypothalamus or the hypothalamic gland, when it loses sensitivity to leptin. And then you're always hungry, and it's a frustrating place to be because your stomach, even if it's full, as the food starts sliding down a little bit, that leptin's going off, and it's like, Regan, you need to eat again. You're fine. You're hungry. We need food. And this happens because you've lost that ability to sense, that it's called vagal tone, that vagus nerve that connects your brain to your gut is not healthy. And one of the big tests that we're doing these days is what we call the BOS scan. And so several of you have had it where we put this, these electrodes on your wrists. And then we can really sense, how healthy your heart rate variability is, how healthy the brain patterns are. And in a lot of you, we can also look at the health of the vagus nerve. And it's called the neural humoral regulation. And many times it's, just looking at the electrical signals in the body, you can see when somebody's got leptin resistance. And if you have not had that test, next time you're at the office or anytime we're doing one of our Ageless future events, just ask us. We'll do the test. It takes 5 minutes. Very easy to do. So that's leptin resistance. And remember, the hormone on the other side, when leptin is resistant, it's not leptin that makes you hungry. It is ghrelin. And so ghrelin is like when leptin's not turning it off, holy cow, then you get hungry. Just like you were when you were a kid, you could eat anything, just like you devoured food. And this is where some of the growth hormone peptides that you guys love, and you're like, why do I have to cycle off, Regan? Well, you don't want to overexpress ghrelin and get super hungry all the time. And even if you don't cycle off of it, there's been cases where you can develop insulin resistance. So this is where, you go periods, 5 days on, 2 days off. We may take 30 days off here and there. It's really important to do. Even if you're trying to bulk up, just be patient. Healing is a journey. It's not a destination. So let's talk thyroid resistance. So thyroid resistance happens when your peripheral tissues fail to activate the T4 conversion into T3. Now remember, T4 is basically it's thyroxine. It's 4 iodine molecules stuck to this thyroid protein. And that's too big to dock on the cell to activate the metabolic functions that we want. And so it has to get converted in your liver and your gut into T3. Your thyroid makes very little natural T3. It makes a lot of the T4. And so you can have totally normal TSH levels, which is your thyroid stimulating hormone. Your T4 can look really healthy, but you still have these signs of low energy, low metabolic rate. You've got cold hands and cold feet. And a lot of labs miss these because a lot of your doctors, they're running TSH, they're looking at T4, and they're missing this T3, and especially the free T3. And this is where you don't want to accept just traditional labs where your doctor says everything looks normal. So how do we fix this? Well, exercise is one of your greatest pathways of correcting this. And there's two phenomenal peptides that mimic exercise. One of these is called MADA-C. This is a mitochondrial derived peptide, or an MDP. And the other molecule that we've been using is called SLOOP 332. And these are probably the closest molecules that have ever been studied to date. I mean, there's going to be new ones coming up, but they mimic exercise. And we've talked a lot about, the MADA-C, how it's more expressed in people who live longer, specifically in some of the Japanese populations. They found that they have, greater levels of the gene, that this gene activation of MADA-C. And MADA-C is this encoded mitochondrial genome. So it goes right into the DNA and it activates this energetic pathway called AMPK, or AMP P kinase. And AMPK is like the secondary energy system, and it flushes electrons down the electron transport chain, and then it floods your body with ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, and that ATP is where we get energy from. So MADA-C has been studied in humans and mice. And in humans, what they found is that just after exercising, MADA-C expression goes up about 400 to 500%. And they said, okay, well, let's see if we can mimic this response. And it lasts for about 5 to 6 hours. So, and by the way, MADA-C is going to create more insulin sensitivity. So you get sugar where you want it, not into the fat cell. And this is one reason why MADA-C has been used for insulin resistance, for even diabetics, for obesity. And this is where we may use it with like a GLP-1, like tirzepatide, semaglutide, retatrutide, because it activates and enhances this lipid beta oxidation. So what that means is you're going to be burning fat, or it's called lipolysis. Your body wants to use the fat as an energy source because you've activated AMPK. And by the way, on the other side of AMPK is called mTOR. And mTOR is how we build muscle, but AMPK is one way that you promote autophagy. So you clear out the old cells. So a lot of people get very fixated on, like using rapamycin or other agents to turn off or inhibit mTOR. But what we found is you can use peptides like SLOOP 332, you can use MADA-C, you can use SS31, add in some methylene blue, and things get really, really fun. So you can literally, potentially mimic this metabolic reflex. Another peptide that we found, or molecule technically, is called Tessofensin. And what this does is it allows for greater reuptake of dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and then it calms down the appetite, because if you've read the book, The Balanced Brain, and if you haven't read it, snag it. It's so good. But what we learned is just the pursuit of pleasure in life is just as helpful as pleasure itself. And a lot of mental illness shows up in our lives because we don't have a future that's programmed to excite us. We're just doing the day-to-day things. And it's really important that you change things up, get some trips planned, meet some new people, go to a party, and, book a party at the top of the World Trade Center and invite Reagan. I mean, that, I'll give you a hug. That will bring you a little pleasure maybe, but it's really good. So with Tessofensin, what they found in some of the clinical trials, they found that there's a 10 to 12% weight loss over 6 months. And this was at a 1 milligram dose. And so versus the placebo, this is 1 milligram per 2 kilograms. Now, we don't like to dose it over 500 micrograms. So we do a very, very small dose. And so, if you do more than that, sometimes it can impact sleep, which is what we don't want to have happen. But as far as flow state goes, there's nothing like Tessofensin that we found. As it activates norepinephrine, that's one of the ways that it changes the thermostat. And it says, okay, Reagan's warm enough, his metabolism is safe, and he can burn fat now. And what the research also shows is when you use Tessofensin, there's improvements in insulin sensitivity and glycemic control. And so very, very powerful. The other power is the 5-amino 1MQ. And, yes, these are all some of my favorite peptides because they work on these beautiful mitochondrial pathways. This was discovered, and I do have a lot of YouTube videos. Go to my new YouTube channel, Regan Archibald, Ageless Future, and go deep dive. I just am releasing new videos on 5-amino-1MQ. Thank you for all of you who have subscribed. The channel is really growing. I'm proud of it. It's it's so much work. Thank you, Anne, who helps me keep it all organized. But 5-amino it's a great way to stack, your metabolic profile, and it inhibits this pathway called NNMT. And this pathway was discovered in the 1950s, and researchers found when this pathway is active, it's recruiting fat cells. And this is where that, as we kicked things off, that's where that metabolic disease and insulin resistance really starts to get triggered. And so what happens when you use 5-amino-1MQ is it turns off that pathway, or it inhibits the NNMT. When it's agonized, when it's active, it's recruiting fat cells. I think I said when it's inhibited, that's not correct. It's when it's active. But what 5-amino-1MQ does is it boosts NAD by a magnitude of about 160% of your own NAD, the cleanest version of NAD you can get. And that improves this nice fat burning. In some of the data with this specific with animals, they had a 5% total loss of body weight loss in 11 days, 35% reduction in white adipose tissue. You can add this in with adipetide. Adipetide turns off the enzymes for the blood vessels that feed the white fat in your body, which you don't want. You want to see this white fat turn into beige fat, and that makes it metabolically active. So there's another way you can do this: cold plunge. That's right. So you can do cold plunge and also activate this beige fat. And so a lot of great things. Stem cells and exosomes have also been looked at for creating better metabolic health. We've seen this with type 1 diabetes, type 2. What we find in type 1 is it does seem to improve some of the islet cells. We have not seen anything consistent as far as reversal, but we have seen patients who don't need as much insulin, which it increases their quality of life. We've seen this in type 2 diabetes as we add in exercise, muscle building, increase your testosterone. Testosterone helps you hold on to muscle, and it does seem to stabilize this whole metabolic pathway. But type 2, we see it's not unusual to see people get rid of their type 2 diabetes. It's very exciting to watch. So where it all starts is get your blood labs ran. So if you have not ran your blood labs in the last 60 days, well, if you're like me, I like to run them often because I'm doing experiments for you guys very frequently, and myself. But the thing you want to do is every 6 months minimum is run your functional blood panel. And you guys have ran these with us. For those of you who have not, the functional medicine and looking at health from an optimization perspective will give you a much greater return on your investment than just looking at conventional lab ranges, because what we do is we take the scientific data and we start to see where the body starts to deviate from its natural rhythms. And this is where you can look at things outside of the standard range. You can include like reverse T3, free T3, free T4. Look at the ratios. You can look at fasting insulin. You can look at your HOMA-IR. That's your insulin resistance score. You can look at leptin and adiponectin, and then advanced inflammatory markers. And so just by getting the right data, that's really where you can start circumventing a lot of the issues that can show up in some of these issues with metabolic burnout and hormonal resistance. So for those of you who are really looking for the path, and you say, I don't want to let this aging get the best of me. I want to look my best and feel my best, even at my 100th birthday party. Well, these peptides are novel ways of creating leverage, but the peptides are not going to outdo a sedentary lifestyle. They won't outdo overeating, or if you're not eating the right protein quantities. So make sure that you're getting your foundational pieces set. The 30-30 exercise protocol, get 60 minutes every day minimum. That's what the research shows, is where you can decrease your risk of dying substantially, and actually you'll live 27 to 31% longer just by doing that. So add some health to your years and years to your life. I mean, why not? Exercise, make it really fun. No matter where you are, you can always figure out ways of exercise, even if it's carrying a suitcase through the airport. My son and I have challenges like don't put down your suitcase. Let's see how far, And so we don't take the elevator, we take the stairs. There's just little tiny things you can do to add in some extra steps. So tell me what you guys got out of the conversation today. And Marcus, appreciate that. You welcomed your son to the real world. That's right. He had no idea. He just thought I went there and was, shaking hands and kissing babies. So I'm like, no, it's real work. We're reading labs, we're interpreting data, we're helping people, solve people's health, concerns, getting them enrolled in programs. It's, we're growing as an organization. We got big, ambitious goals. And so, we want to get out there and add some value to the world, and just like you guys do. But did anyone have any questions on any of that? Because, what we shared was, yes, at high level, we said, okay, let's get rid of this whole metabolic burnout, which happens to all of us at some stage of life. And then once we get rid of that, let's make sure it's gone for good. And how do we fix things for good? Well, we make sure that your metabolic pathways are very optimized by building really healthy muscles. How do you build healthy muscles? Well, you got to have the good brain so that you don't have this leptin resistance. You're not hungry all the time. And then the good brain helps you make better decisions, more clarity for the vision of your future self. And then the cherry on top is making sure you've got good cardiovascular health. And so VO2 max training, look at the Norwegian 4x4, do that once a week and you won't regret it. So really appreciate you guys. And for those of you who got the email from me and have responded, I really appreciate that. We've invited you to our Ageless Future Academy. And so make sure you sign up. We're going to be doing kind of our kickoff. We're going to do some of the beta testing in August and September and October. And then we're going to open enrollment for our Ageless Future Academy. And that's where we'll create cohorts of many of you. And we're just going to create this ageless future in all the different communities that you guys live and have these cool meetups. So Bill, good to have you on. Appreciate you guys and love you guys. And I will see you next week.